The switch was thrown. Electricity surged through his body, and then, from behind the leather hood, he started screaming, "Take it off! Let me breathe!" The executioner looked at the warden. The warden looked at the witnesses. Nobody moved, because nobody had a protocol for this. Willie Francis was supposed to be dead. He wasn't. The date was May 3rd, 1946. The place was St. Martinville, Louisiana, a small town in the American South where everyone knew everyone and where the law moved slowly until it didn't. Willie Francis was 17 years old, the son of a laborer, one of 13 children. He had grown up in St. Martinville, had gone to school there, had worked there. He was not a stranger in that town. The people who watched him be convicted were people who had seen him on the street. He had been convicted of the murder of Andrew Thomas, a local pharmacist, 2 years earlier. The case against him was built largely on a confession, a document that Willie later said he had signed under pressure, without a lawyer, without fully understanding what he was putting his name to. He was 15 years old when he was arrested. 15 years old, alone in a room with investigators, signing a paper in a language of law he had never been taught. The trial lasted 1 day. The jury was all white. Willie was black. The deliberation took 15 minutes. The sentence was death. On the morning of May 3rd, Willie was transported from Angola State Penitentiary to St. Martinville. Louisiana used a portable electric chair. It traveled by truck from execution to execution, assembled and reassembled in whatever room had been prepared. They called it Gruesome Gertie. It had a history. It had been used before. It was supposed to be reliable. What nobody in that room knew was that the night before, the equipment had been assembled by a prison guard who was drunk. A convicted murderer serving time at Angola had assisted with the wiring. Neither of them had done it correctly. The chair was misconfigured in ways that would not be visible to the eye, only to the body of the man strapped into it. Willie Francis was led into the room. He was strapped in. The leather hood was placed over his head, cutting off his sight, his air, the faces of the people watching. The electrodes were attached to his body. The warden gave the signal. The executioner threw the switch. The current hit Willie. Witnesses confirmed that. He lurched forward against the straps, his body tensed. The room was silent except for the sound of the equipment running, and then the sound from behind the hood. "Take it off, let me breathe." The misconfigured wiring had delivered enough voltage to cause agony, and not enough to stop his heart. Willie Francis was being electrocuted without dying. Every second the current ran, he felt it. Every second he was still there. The switch was cut. The room went quiet. Willie Francis was unstrapped from the chair. He stood up. In the entire history of the American electric chair, dating back to 1890, no condemned man had ever survived it. Willie Francis had just become the first. He was 17 years old. He had just felt electricity surge through his body. He had begged from behind a leather hood in front of a room full of witnesses. And he was still alive. For one brief moment it must have felt like something, like a sign, like the world making a different decision. That moment did not last long. Before we continue, subscribe to Savage Century. It means everything to us. Louisiana had a problem. The chair had failed. The condemned man was alive and breathing and had been walked out of the execution room by the same officials who had walked him in, and the state had to decide what to do next. The decision came quickly. They scheduled a second execution. Willie Francis had survived the electric chair, and the state's response was to schedule another date with it. A local attorney named Bertrand de Blanc took the case. De Blanc was white, Catholic, from St. Martinville, the same town where Andrew Thomas had died, the same town where Willie had been tried. He did not have to take the case. He chose to. His argument was precise and urgent. Executing Willie a second time would constitute cruel and unusual punishment, a direct violation of the Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution. Willie had already suffered. He had already experienced the chair, not as an abstraction, not as a legal concept, but in his body, in real time, screaming behind a leather hood in front of witnesses. To strap him in again would be to punish him twice for the same crime. To do so with full knowledge of what the first attempt had already cost him was not justice. It was cruelty with paperwork. The case moved through Louisiana's courts and was denied at every level. De Blanc took it to the Supreme Court of the United States. The case was Louisiana XRL, Francis v. Weber, argued before 9 justices in January 1947. The question on the table was simple and devastating. Does a second execution after a failed first attempt violate the constitutional prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment? Willie Francis, now 18 years old, waited for the answer. On January 13, 1947, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 against Willie Francis. 1 vote, just one. That was the difference between Willie Francis living the rest of his life and Willie Francis going back to the chair. The majority held that the failed execution had been accidental, not deliberate, and that Louisiana was therefore free to proceed. The suffering was acknowledged, the drunk guard was acknowledged, the botched wiring was acknowledged. None of it was enough. It didn't matter. The decision had already been made. Justice Harold Burton wrote the dissent. He argued that sending Willie back to the chair, with full knowledge of what the first attempt had done to him, was precisely the cruelty the Eighth Amendment existed to prevent. That the suffering was not diminished by being accidental. That a man who had already lived through his own execution could not be made to live through it again without the Constitution having something to say about it. 4 justices agreed with him. 5 did not. Willie Francis was going back to the chair. There is a specific kind of dread that has no name, not fear, because fear lives in uncertainty. This was something else entirely. This was knowing the room, knowing the chair, knowing the smell of the leather hood and the sound the straps make when they are tightened, and the moment just before the switch is thrown, when the air in the room changes and every person present becomes very still. He had already felt it once, and this time he knew it wouldn't stop. Willie Francis spent the months between the Supreme Court decision and his second execution date inside that knowledge. He was 18 years old. People who visited him during those months described a young man who had become quieter, not broken, quieter. He spoke about his faith, he spoke about his family, he wrote letters, he prayed. He did not speak much about the chair. There were people on the outside still fighting for him. Appeals for clemency filed with the Louisiana governor, petitions signed, arguments made. None of them succeeded. The machinery of the state had been set in motion, and it did not stop for petitions. On May 9, 1947, Willie was transported back to St. Martinville for the second time. Gruesome Gertie had been reassembled. This time the equipment was checked carefully. This time there was no drunk guard, no convicted murderer handling the wiring. The state of Louisiana was not going to let the machinery fail a second time. Every connection was verified. Every component was in order. Willie Francis was strapped into the chair. The leather hood was placed over his head. The switch was thrown. Willie Francis died at 12:05 in the afternoon. He was 18 years old. He had survived one execution, spent months waiting inside the knowledge of a second, appealed to the highest court in the country, and lost by a single vote. The guard who had botched the first attempt was never charged with any crime. The officials who scheduled the second execution faced no consequence. The 5 justices who ruled against him went on with their careers. The equipment worked correctly the second time. Willie Francis wasn't the only one, but he was the one who got the worst ending, because before Willie, decades before, centuries before, there were others, men and women who also survived their own executions. who also stood in rooms where the machinery had failed and waited to find out what came next. And what happened to some of them was even harder to explain. England, February 23rd, 1885. His name was John Henry George Lee, 21 years old, convicted of murdering Emma Keyes, the elderly woman in Babbacombe, Devon, for whom he worked as a servant. The evidence was largely circumstantial. Lee maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. The jury took 40 minutes. The sentence was death by hanging. The hangman was James Berry, one of the most experienced executioners in England, a professional who had carried out dozens of executions without incident. The morning before Lee was brought out, Berry tested the trapdoor mechanism. It opened perfectly. He tested it again. It opened again. The wood was solid. The hinges were functioning. Everything was in order. Then they brought John Lee to the scaffold. The trapdoor did not open. Berry ordered Lee to step aside. He tested the door himself, standing on it, jumping on it. It opened. He brought Lee back and positioned him correctly over the trap. The trapdoor did not open. The witnesses inside Exeter Prison, officials, a chaplain, prison staff, watched in a silence that none of them would ever fully describe, without some trace of disbelief still in their voice. Berry ordered Lee aside a second time, tested the mechanism again. It opened immediately, smoothly, without any resistance whatsoever. Lee was brought back to the scaffold. The trapdoor did not open. 3 attempts, 3 failures. The same mechanism that had worked perfectly every single time it was tested refused 3 consecutive times to open under the weight and position of John Lee's body. Engineers would later speculate about warped wood from overnight rain, a subtle defect in the hinge that only activated under specific conditions. But the people in that yard in 1885 did not have those explanations. What they had was a young man who had stood over an open grave 3 times and was still breathing. The prison authorities sent a telegram to the Home Office. The execution was halted. John Lee's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He served 22 years, was released in 1907, gave interviews, wrote a memoir, and died in 1945 at the age of 80. History called him the man they could not hang. But even his case had a precedent, a case from 80 years earlier on the other side of the world, where the rope didn't just fail once or twice, it failed 3 times. 3 different ropes, and what happened next was even harder to explain. Sydney, Australia, September 26, 1803. The colony was young and brutal, built on convict labor, governed by men administering British law at the edge of the known world. The condemned man's name was Joseph Samuel, 22 years old, convicted of murdering a police constable during a robbery. The evidence against him was disputed even at the time. There were questions about witness accounts, about the chain of events, about whether Samuel had been present at the moment of the killing or arrived after. The court was not interested in those questions. The sentence was death by hanging. The gallows had been erected in the center of Sydney. The crowd had gathered. Public executions in 1803 were attended by hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people who came to watch the law being carried out in the open air. Joseph Samuel was brought forward and positioned beneath the rope. The first rope broke. The crowd went silent. Officials conferred. A second rope was found and carefully prepared. Samuel climbed the scaffold again. The second rope slipped from the knot. Samuel dropped, hit the ground, and stood up. The crowd was no longer silent. Witnesses described chaos, shouting, people pressing against the barriers, officials calling for order in a yard that had lost it entirely. A third rope was brought. The knot was checked. A third attempt was made. The third rope broke. 3 ropes, 3 failures. Joseph Samuel stood beneath the ruined scaffold, and for a long moment, nobody moved. The governor of New South Wales was present that day. His name was Philip Gidley King, Faced with 3 failed attempts, a living man, and a crowd of hundreds who had witnessed every second of it, he made a decision that would separate his name from most of the others in this story. He commuted the sentence to life imprisonment. Joseph Samuel served his time. History recorded him as the man the gallows refused to take. 3 broken ropes and a governor who stopped, that was the difference between his story and Willie Francis's. But even Joseph Samuel's case was not the oldest, not the strangest, not the one that begins in a prison yard and ends somewhere nobody expected. That one involved a coffin and a woman who woke up inside it. England, winter 1650. Her name was Anne Greene, a servant in the household of Sir Thomas Reed in Oxfordshire, convicted of infanticide, the death of a newborn that medical historians would later argue was a stillbirth, delivered in secret after a pregnancy she had hidden out of fear. In 1650, the distinction between a stillbirth and a killing was not one that courts spent much time examining. The sentence was death. Anne Greene was hanged in the prison yard. The hanging lasted 30 minutes. When it was over, witnesses reported that soldiers struck her body to make certain death had occurred. She was cut down, placed into a wooden coffin, and transported to Oxford, to the rooms of a physician named Thomas Willis, who had arranged to use her body for an anatomy lesson that afternoon. When they opened the coffin, Anne Greene made a sound. It was faint, barely there, something between a breath and a groan. The physicians froze. She was breathing, faintly, irregularly, almost imperceptibly, but breathing. What followed was not a second execution, it was a medical emergency. Willis and his colleagues worked through the night, and Anne Greene recovered. Fully. She went home. She married. She lived for another 15 years. Her case became celebrated in medical circles, one of the earliest documented survivals of judicial execution, studied and written about for decades afterward. But what stayed with everyone who heard her story was not the medicine. It was the question underneath it. What if the coffin had gone somewhere else? What if no physician had been present? What if the sound she made had been dismissed? Or simply not heard? No one would have known. And that is the thread that runs through every case in this episode. Not the failure of the machinery. Machinery fails. The thread is the decision made in the moment after failure. When someone in the room looks at a person who is still breathing, still present, still capable of suffering, and has to choose what to do next. A governor who stopped. A telegram that halted a third attempt, physicians who worked through the night, a pardon signed by men who could not explain what they had witnessed, and 5 justices who said, try again. 4 people, 3 centuries, 4 countries. And Greene, who woke up in a coffin and lived 15 more years. Joseph Samuel, who stood beneath 3 broken ropes and was finally spared. John Lee, who stepped over a trapdoor that refused to open and walked out of prison into old age. And Willie Francis, who felt the chair at 17, survived it, appealed to the highest court in the country, lost by 1 vote, and was killed in the same chair at 18. Each of these cases was documented. Each of them forced the legal systems of their time into a question those systems were never designed to answer honestly. If the execution fails, has justice been served? The answers varied. But Willie's answer is the one that should stay with you after this video ends, because Willie's case didn't happen in 1650, when medicine was guesswork and law was improvised at the edge of empire. It happened in 1946, in the United States, with lawyers, with courts, with a constitution that explicitly prohibited cruel and unusual punishment, with 9 justices whose entire purpose was to interpret that prohibition and apply it. And it still came down to 1 vote, 1 justice, 1 position on 1 January morning in 1947. The 4 who dissented understood exactly what was being decided. Justice Burton wrote it plainly, sending a man back to a chair he had already survived. knowing what it had already cost him, knowing what it would cost him again, was precisely the cruelty the Eighth Amendment existed to prevent. He was outvoted. The drunk guard who botched the first execution was never charged. The officials who scheduled the second faced no consequence. The 5 justices went on with their careers, their reputations, their lives. And Willie Francis, at 18 years old, was strapped into a chair for the second time, with the full knowledge of what was coming, and did not survive it. This is what history looks like when you get close enough to see the people inside it. Not abstract forces, not inevitable outcomes. People making decisions, tired, certain, afraid, or drunk in a prison yard the night before an execution, and other people living and dying inside those decisions. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes it works exactly as intended. You made it to the end, and that means something. These stories are not easy to carry. They are real, documented, and they do not resolve the way we want them to. Leave a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one. And if there is a case from your country, a story your history books left out, tell us. The next episode might be closer to home than you think. Subscribe to Savage Century if you haven't yet. Share this video with someone who thinks they know history. We'll see you in the next one.